Montana Territory, August 1880. The rider came hard over the ridge, his horse lathered and blowing. Dust clung to the man's coat and hat, the sun catching the edge of a rifle strapped to his saddle. Below him, nestled in a shallow basin of cottonwoods and dying willows, was a homestead, or what was left of one. Lachlan Tamarin pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the basin. Smoke still curled from what remained of the barn, and the cabin's front door hung off its hinges. He dismounted slowly, rifle in hand, boots crunching on dry grass. He had not come looking for trouble, but he had seen too much not to expect it. Behind the cabin, something moved, a flash of pale blue skirt. He raised the rifle halfway. Then a voice raw and desperate cut through the stillness. "Don't shoot!" A woman stepped out from behind the broken corral, her hands raised, her dress stained with blood. Not her own, Lachlan realized as she got closer. She looked young, maybe 20. Her hair was loose and tangled, her lips cracked. She limped as she walked. He lowered the rifle. "You all right, miss?" She stared at him for a long second. Then her knees buckled. Lachlan caught her before she hit the ground. Her name was Ada Calloway, 22 years old. Her husband had died 4 months ago, and she had been living on the land with her 2 children, trying to hold on to what little they had. 2 days ago, 3 men came through. They took the horse, ransacked the food. When she fought back, they tied her up and locked the children in the root cellar. "They left yesterday morning," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Said they'd come back for the rest. I could not get the door open. I tried. Lachlan yanked the root cellar door open with a rusted crowbar, and the children inside blinked up at him, dazed and silent. A boy and a girl, both under 10. The girl, maybe 5, wrapped her arms around Ada's leg the moment she was free. The boy, Elijah, stared at Lachlan. "Are you going to kill us too?" "No," Lachlan said gently. "I am not here to hurt you." He looked at Ada. She was shaking, her arms around both children, her face pale and drawn. She had not slept. She had not eaten. Her hands were scraped raw. He made a choice then, one he would not take back. "You all need to come with me. You cannot stay here." Ada's eyes welled up. "Where?" "There is a small town south of here. I have a place. Not much, but it is safe." She looked down at her children, then back at him. "I do not know you." "I know. But I am not going to hurt you." She hesitated, then nodded. They buried the bodies of the 2 goats behind the barn, packed what little food remained, and left the basin behind by sundown. Lachlan's place sat at the edge of a flat valley, near a creek and a stand of pine. He had built it with his own hands, 1 room, a lean-to stable, a well. It was not much, but it was clean, safe. Ada's hands trembled when he gave her water and a blanket. She kept the children close, eyes darting to every shadow. When he lit the fire, she flinched. He did not ask questions, just cooked beans and set out bread. Elijah ate like he had not seen food in weeks. The little girl, Elsie, clung to Ada's side and refused to speak. Later, when the children were asleep on a pallet in the corner, Ada sat on the bench near the fire. Her shoulders were hunched. Her fingers twisted in her skirt. "I thought I could do it," she said quietly. "I thought I could hold it all together." "You did," Lachlan said. "You kept them alive." Her eyes filled again. She shook her head. "I am not strong." "You are." She covered her face with her hands. "They said they would come back." They laughed. "They said they would take me next time. I cannot go through that again." Lachlan sat down beside her, not touching her, just close. The fire crackled. She turned toward him suddenly, her voice breaking. "Don't hurt me. I will be your wife." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. He did not speak. He did not move. He just looked at her, really looked, and saw the fear behind the offer. the trembling hope, the exhaustion. "I am not going to hurt you," he said softly. She blinked, as if she had not expected that. "I do not want anything from you but for you to feel safe." She covered her mouth, and tears slid down her cheeks. "I do not know what to do anymore." "Then just sit here," he said. "That is enough for tonight." She leaned toward him slowly, uncertain. Her head touched his shoulder. He did not move. They sat like that for a long time. The fire burned low, and outside the wind moved through the trees. Inside, for the first time in days, it was quiet. The next morning, Ada was the first to rise. She washed her face at the pump and tied back her hair. Lachlan was chopping wood when she came to him. "I can work," she said. "You do not need." "I want to." So he let her. She swept the floor, washed the children's clothes, mended a tear in one of his shirts. She moved carefully, like someone still waiting to be struck. But every time he passed her, he nodded or said thank you. Slowly, her shoulders began to relax. That night she cooked. It was a simple stew with potatoes and salt pork, but it filled the cabin with warmth. Lachlan watched her from across the table. She caught him looking once, and for a second, she smiled. Days passed. Elijah helped with the animals. Elsie began speaking again, mostly to her mother. Ada laughed once quiet and surprised, and the sound stayed with Lachlan long after. There were no more talks of marriage. No more desperate offers. But one night, under a sky full of stars, Ada stood beside him outside the cabin. The air was cool. The children were asleep. "I meant it, you know," she said quietly. He looked at her. "What?" "I would be your wife. You do not owe me that." "I know. I just wanted you to know." He nodded slowly. Then he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I am not ready," she said. "I will wait," he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she took his hand and held it. Just held it. And for the first time she did not flinch. By early September, the first frost came in the night, silvery and thin across the grass, and the mornings began to taste like iron. Ada started lighting the fire before dawn. Her hands steadier now, her movements sure. Lachlan woke each day to the quiet scrape of wood against iron and the soft clatter of tin pots, not the silence of fear that had once hung in her like a second skin. He'd started teaching Elijah how to set snares along the tree line, and the boy listened close, eyes sharp, questions thoughtful. Ada watched from the porch sometimes, arms wrapped around Elsie, her face unreadable but calm. She spoke little during the lessons, but once, when Elijah brought in a rabbit he'd caught himself, she rested her hand on Lachlan's sleeve without thinking. "Thank you," she said, not looking at him. Then she turned and went inside. That night, Lachlan found her near the creek, rinsing a shirt in the cold water. "Did you live alone before?" she asked, wringing the cloth over her knee. He crouched beside her, sleeves rolled up from chopping. "No, I had a brother. He died near the Powder River 3 winters back." Her hands paused in the water. "Was it sickness?" "No. He was shot." Lachlan looked out toward the pine hills. "He got into a quarrel over a fence. Some men think land draws lines between people. He didn't, but they did." Ada's mouth tightened. "That's how James died." He didn't ask who James was. The name hung too heavy to need explaining. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She nodded once, then lifted the wet cloth and twisted it dry. "Do you miss him?" Lachlan asked. "I did," she said, "until fear took up all the space. Now I just miss who I was when he was alive." She stood, water dripping from her sleeves. "I don't even know what I'm becoming now." He didn't try to name it for her. That evening, she let the children sleep on the bed while she settled herself near the fire with a patch of mending. The silence between her and Lachlan was the easy kind, filled with the low crackle of flame and the occasional sound of a needle pulling thread. "I never meant to stay here," she said, without looking up. "We were going to move east come spring. James had a cousin in Ohio. There was a job waiting in a tannery." Lachlan shifted in his chair, arms resting on his knees. "You still could." "I could." She looped the thread again. "But I won't." She set the shirt aside. "The mail wagon passed once since we arrived. I could have asked you to flag it. I didn't." He nodded. "I noticed. I don't want to be somewhere new. I want to be somewhere steady." Lachlan didn't answer. He just reached for the tin cup beside him and poured her some of the cider he'd warmed earlier. When he handed it over, their fingers brushed. She held the cup but didn't drink. "Would you have taken me if I hadn't had the children?" "I don't take people," he said. "But I'd have helped you, yes. Even if I hadn't begged?" His gaze didn't waver. "Even then." She looked down at the cup. "You're not like the men I've known." He smiled faintly. "I've been told I'm too quiet for my own good." She set the cup down and stood. "I don't mind the quiet anymore." She walked to the bed, settled between her children, and looked back at him once. He banked the fire, then leaned against the hearth wall, watching the embers fade to ash. When the wind rose outside, she didn't stir. And for the first time, neither did Elsie. The next morning, Ada was humming while she kneaded dough, flour dusted across her arms. Lachlan came in from the barn and paused at the door, watching her. She didn't notice him right away. "I didn't know I remembered that tune," she said when she finally looked up. "My mother used to sing it while she worked." He stepped closer. "That's a good thing to remember." She kept kneading, her hands steady. "I think I'm starting to remember more." He nodded and didn't ask what. She didn't need to say. Later, after the bread had cooled and Elijah had gone out to check the line traps, Lachlan walked past the well and found Ada sitting beside the drying racks, stitching a new dress for Elsie from an old flour sack. She didn't look up as he approached. "There's a piece of land just west of the creek. Catches full sun. Would be good for a garden. There's seed in the cellar," he said. "I'd like to try in the spring." He crouched beside her, watching her needle move. "Then we will." She looked at him fully then. "We, if you want." Ada didn't answer right away. Her hands stilled on the cloth. Then she reached out, slow and certain, and laid her fingers over his. "I do." By the time the first snow settled on the high ridges, the cabin had grown into something more than shelter. A second cot had been built near the hearth, fashioned from pine slats and thick canvas. The children had drawn a picture on the wall in charcoal, just a sun and some stick figures, but Ada hadn't washed it off. She said it made the place feel like it had grown roots. Lachlan had started cutting extra firewood at dawn, stacking it high along the north wall where wind couldn't reach. Ada had begun saving lard from the cooking, mixing it with salt and ash for soap. Her hands no longer trembled when she worked, and her voice had taken on weight. Not loud but sure. One evening, while Elsie napped and Elijah was still out with the mule cart gathering pine cones, Ada stood beside the hearth, drying her hair with a scrap of linen. "He asked if we were staying forever," she said, wringing the cloth slowly. "I told him I didn't know what forever looked like, but this place feels steady." Lachlan was setting the kettle on the firehook. "That's what I hoped to build here. Something that could take a beating and still stand." Ada draped the cloth over a chair back. "Did you ever think about your own family? Children, I mean, before?" He leaned on the mantel, considering. "I thought I might once. Before the war took my time and the trail took the rest." She nodded, then turned toward the window. The sun was dipping low, light slanting across the floorboards. "I used to think it was selfish to want stillness," she said. "But I don't anymore." She moved to the table and picked up the shirt she'd been mending for Elijah. You've given them more than a roof. They sleep without fear now. Lachlan stirred the fire absently. Sometimes I wonder if it's enough. Ada folded the shirt carefully. It is. For them. And for me. A gust of wind slipped through the chink near the doorframe. He stepped over and pressed the wool scrap tighter against it. We'll need to patch that before frost deepens. I'll cut a new piece tomorrow. I can sew it in, she said. I've stitched worse things. He glanced at her, and for the first time in days, her eyes held his a little longer than necessary. She picked up the soup ladle and stirred the pot, then lifted a spoonful to taste. Needs pepper, she said quietly. I'll check the pouch, Lachlan offered, stepping beside her. Their hands brushed over the spice tin. This time, neither pulled away. Later that night, after the children were settled beneath a quilt Ada had pieced together from old shirts and feed sacks, she stood in the doorway, watching the stars. The wind had quieted. Snow glimmered faintly along the fence posts. Lachlan joined her, pulling his coat tight. I used to think stars were just decoration, she said. Now I think they're reminders, that there's more than what we've lost. He didn't speak, only looked up with her. She turned to him after a moment. I'd like to plant corn next year, and beans. I still remember how to string them proper. You'll have a full field if you want it. I don't want it alone. The words came like a steady breath, clear and settled. He looked at her and she didn't flinch. I've been waiting for you to say that, he said. She reached up, touched his jaw, and then rested her head against his chest. Inside, the cabin was warm. The fire burned low, steady and strong. And outside, the stars watched silently, as if the earth had finally let something bloom. The snow deepened by mid-November, heavy enough that the wagon wheels had to be lifted and stored, the axles greased and wrapped in burlap. The mule was kept close to the stable, and Lachlan strung pine boughs over the roofline to keep the weight of snow from breaking the rafters. Inside, the warmth held steady. Most nights, Ada read aloud from the psalter her mother had given her as a girl, her voice low, and even while the children studied the pages like they held secrets. One morning, while Elsie traced letters in the ash on the hearthstone, Ada stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass. Do you hire out in winter? She asked. Lachlan glanced up from the leather strap he was oiling. Not unless someone's stock goes missing or a neighbor needs hauling. Why? I've been sewing when the children sleep. I thought to trade some of it when the road's clear. You'll get fair coin for it, he said. Maybe better than fair. She turned, folding her arms. I don't want to depend on what you set aside. I'd rather pull my share. You already do. She didn't argue, just nodded once, then went back to the cupboard. She didn't like praise. He'd learned that. Later that week, after the wind died down, Lachlan took Elijah out toward the dry ridge where the elk sometimes passed. They didn't find tracks, but they marked a path with ash and stone, something to watch for once the thaw came. When they returned, Ada was bent over the table, Elsie asleep beside her. The girl's cheek rested against the hem of a dress in progress, her thumb still tucked in her mouth. She fell waiting, Ada said, smoothing back her daughter's hair. She's been asking if we'll have a Christmas like we did when James was alive. Lachlan set his gloves on the stove edge to dry. What did it look like? An orange in each stocking, she said. A bit of sugar ribbon if we could afford it. James sang. Not well, but loud. She laughed quietly, then ran her fingers along a worn bit of cloth. I thought to make a pie from the dried berries. There's still a twist of honey in the jar. He nodded. We'll gather some pine cones. Hang them with twine. She looked at him for a long moment, then stepped closer. Would you sing, if I asked? I would, he said, though I give no promises it'd be in key. She leaned her forehead against his chest, just briefly. That's not what matters. They didn't touch again that evening, but when she tucked the children in, her voice carried through the cabin in a quiet hum, something old and tuneless but warm. The next day, Ada handed Lachlan a folded square of wool. "I made this for you." It was a scarf, stitched clean with a simple edge. He turned it over once in his hands. "I didn't know if you'd want it," she said, "but I wanted to give it." He met her eyes. "I'll wear it every day." She looked away quickly, but her mouth curved, just slightly. She didn't answer. That night, a storm came down from the north, and they gathered close inside. Lachlan read a few lines aloud from a book he'd carried from Fort Benton years ago, the print worn at the corners. Ada stitched by firelight, her fingers deft and quiet. The children had taken to asking him questions now, Elijah about the way trees bent in wind, Elsie about whether bears slept like people. When the wind howled, Ada stood and checked the shutters, then returned to her seat without a word. She was careful but no longer afraid. Lachlan leaned over, close enough to feel the edge of her warmth. "You sleep easier now." She nodded. "Because I know what I wake to." She folded the stitching and set it aside. "I don't know what comes next, but I wanted to come here. With you." He didn't speak, just reached for her hand. She laced her fingers through his, and in the hush between words, with the fire low and the wind pressing soft against the walls, it was understood. Everything that had come before the ache, the fear, the silence had led to this. Not a promise spoken, but a life begun. The thaw came slower than expected. By early March, the snow had melted down to patchy banks along the creek, and the ground beneath turned soft and black with promise. Ada sat outside most afternoons with her sleeves rolled and her hem pinned up, her hands busy with seed sorting or measuring the garden rows with twine and a worn stick. Lachlan built a fence around the garden plot, using cedar posts he'd felled the previous summer. Elijah hammered nails in where he was told without complaint, and Elsie gathered the smaller branches for kindling. The rhythm of tasks settled into something quiet and patterned, not rushed, not forced. Days were long now, but not heavy. One morning, Ada stood beside the fence line, watching a pair of finches dart in and out of the willow grove. Lachlan crossed the yard with his coat slung over one shoulder, his boots coated in early mud. "I saw tracks near the south field," he said. "Could be mule deer passing through again. I'll boil water for the hide if you bring one back," she answered, brushing hair from her cheek. "I've a mind to make moccasins for the children. They've near worn the soles through on their shoes." He rested his arms on the fence rail. "You always think 2 steps ahead." "I have to," she said. "It's the only way I've known how to keep them from slipping through the cracks." She looked at him then, steadier than she used to. "But I don't feel like I'm scrambling anymore." "You're not," he said. She hesitated, then stepped across the soft earth toward him. "I keep thinking about building a porch, just wide enough for a bench and a basin. Something to catch the sun in the morning. We can start next week. I mean for us, place to sit, grow old." He didn't answer right away. He brushed dirt from her sleeve, slow and sure. "It's yours if you want it," he said. "I want it with you." That night, once the children were asleep under a quilt Ada had finished the week before, she stood by the hearth and unpinned her hair. The firelight caught in the strands, and Lachlan looked up from his chair, book resting open in his lap. "I've been thinking," she said, voice quiet, "about what we are." He set the book aside. "All right, we've lived beside each other, worked beside each other, and I've let you stay close. But I want more than just comfort, Lachlan." He stood, not hurried. "What do you want?" "I want to be your wife, not out of fear, not for safety, but because I've come to love you." He closed the distance between them in silence. When he reached her, he took her hand and kissed the inside of her wrist. "Then be mine," he said, "because I've loved you since the first night you stayed by my fire and didn't flinch." She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her like it was the most natural thing in the world. They married at the edge of the grove, just past the garden rose, beneath a sky that had just started to bloom with spring blue. Elijah held the ring Lachlan had inherited from his mother, and Elsie scattered pine needles in place of petals. Ada wore a dress sewn from fabric she'd bartered with a traveling peddler dove gray with a faded calico hem. Lachlan had trimmed his beard and wore the scarf she'd made him, despite the warming air. The preacher came from 2 valleys over, riding through the thawed mud with a Bible tucked under his coat and a flask of good whiskey in his saddlebag. He spoke plain, said what needed saying, and left the rest to the wind. When the vows were spoken and the hands joined, Ada didn't cry. She only smiled, quiet and full, like someone who had stood at the edge of a storm and found her way through. Afterward, they passed around bread and dried apples, and the children played near the porch post Ada had marked with string for measuring its rise. As the sun slipped low, Lachlan and Ada sat on the step, her head against his shoulder. "Do you think it will last?" she asked softly. He kissed her temple. "It already has." Years passed, but the porch was built that spring, just as she'd imagined. The garden grew thick with beans and corn, and the children outgrew their moccasins and began building things of their own. Ada kept sewing, trading her work in town for sugar and cloth. Lachlan taught Elijah how to track properly, how to repair a bridle without fuss. Elsie learned to bake by watching her mother's hands. They grew, all of them, into something whole. And on warm evenings, when the wind came soft through the pine and the sun bled gold across the valley, Lachlan would sit beside Ada on the porch she'd dreamed of, her hand in his, her cheek against his shoulder. No fear, no running, only love, steady as the land beneath their feet.